Imagine waking up one day and discovering a door in your mind you've never seen before. Behind it lies everything you've denied: rage, desire, fear, even the parts of yourself you thought were bad. What if I told you that the very darkness you hide is the source of your greatest power? That the life you've been longing for isn't outside you. It's waiting inside, behind the door you've been too afraid to open. The question is simple: will you keep running or step into your own power? Imagine waking up one day in a house you've lived in for years, but suddenly noticing a locked door at the end of the hallway you've never seen before. You walk toward it, heart pounding, fingers trembling on the cold brass handle. It's sealed, but from beneath the crack at the bottom seeps a dark, slow-moving mist. You don't know why, but you sense that what lies beyond is not just a room, but a piece of yourself you've refused to enter. Most people turn back at this point. They distract themselves with noise, light, or routines, anything to avoid pressing their ear to that door. Yet the more they avoid it, the more its presence grows, casting a long shadow over every brightly lit room in their house. That shadow begins to stain their relationships, their choices, even their sense of self. Still, they insist. That door is not mine. That darkness cannot belong to me. But what if it does? What if everything you've denied, feared, or buried, rage, desire, shame, brilliance, hunger for power, the impulse to destroy and create, is not an intruder but an exile? What if your darkness isn't a foreign invader but a suppressed reservoir of energy you've been taught to fear? Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unacknowledged, disowned aspects of your psyche. Yet unlike the villains in fairy tales, this shadow is not inherently evil. It is a mirror showing you the parts of yourself you have disinherited. And here lies the paradox Jung spent his life wrestling with. The very forces you suppress in the name of being good, moral, or acceptable may hold the key to your wholeness and your power. Consider this. Lions don't apologize for their claws. Storms don't restrain their thunder. Yet human beings, especially in a culture obsessed with appearances, are trained to clip their instincts, polish their rage into politeness, file their desires into acceptable checkboxes. We live as curated profiles rather than as whole beings, but in the process, something feral, creative, and essential is locked behind that unseen door. Have you ever wondered why, despite your best efforts at self-improvement, you repeat the same patterns? Why you sabotage your own success at the last moment? Why some secret part of you resents the very life you've built? Jung would suggest it's because your shadow has been running the show from behind the curtain, precisely because you refuse to acknowledge it. Like a child locked in a basement, it grows stranger and more unruly the longer it's ignored. And here is the frightening question. If you keep denying this hidden self, who is actually living your life? Are you the one making your choices? Or is the banished part of you, unseen, unspoken, pulling strings you don't even know exist? Imagine again, standing before that locked door. You sense not only danger, but potential. The mist smells of earth after rain, fertile, alive. You realize the door isn't just a prison, it's also a threshold. Cross it, and you may lose your old image of yourself, but you may also gain a power that has been waiting for you all along. The power to act, to feel, to create, to love without self-deception. What would it mean for you to integrate your darkness instead of repressing it? Would you become dangerous? Or would you become real, Jung? He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That line is both a warning and an invitation. Enlightenment is not escape from the dark, it is illumination of it. We live in an age of curated light, social feeds, positive affirmations, public virtue. Yet under this polished surface, depression, rage, and meaninglessness fester. We pretend the shadows aren't there, but they leak out anyway, in addiction, cruelty, hypocrisy, self-loathing, and despair. Could it be that our collective sickness comes not from darkness itself, but from our refusal to integrate it? Pause for a moment. Think about your own life. Where do you see hints of the shadow? In your envy, your secret fantasies, your suppressed anger, your unexplored creativity? What would happen if you stopped running? What if the very qualities you despise in yourself or fear in others are distorted signals from a deeper source of vitality? This is the threshold we stand on. Beyond it lies not just self-knowledge, but self-integration, the possibility of reclaiming what was lost. Yet crossing it demands courage, honesty, and a willingness to see yourself not as you wish to be seen, but as you truly are. The question, then, is no longer whether you have a shadow. It's whether you will continue to let it rule you from the dark, or whether you will open the door and meet it face to face. And if you do, what will you discover? Why do we lock the door to our own darkness? Why do we spend lifetimes pretending that the parts of ourselves we fear, despise, or misunderstand do not exist? The answer is both painfully simple and infinitely complex, because acknowledging the shadow forces us to confront truths we are not trained to face. From childhood, society whispers, then shouts, that certain feelings, impulses, and desires are unacceptable. Anger must be controlled, desire must be sanitized, fear must be hidden. Even our brilliance is dangerous, lest it draw envy or conflict. Carl Jung called theirs is repression. But he went further. Repression doesn't make darkness disappear. It only pushes it underground, where it simmers, mutates, and exerts influence without your awareness. In Jungian terms, the shadow is not the problem itself. The problem is your refusal to engage with it consciously. Psychologically, this makes sense. The human mind is built to seek safety, predictability, and social approval. From the moment we learn to speak, we internalize rules about what is good and bad, acceptable and shameful. The superego, that internalized moral authority, is relentless. It judges every spontaneous thought, every rebellious desire. Over time, this internal censor grows so dominant that entire layers of experience are excised from consciousness, and yet the excise does not vanish. Jung likened the shadow to a hidden twin. It grows in the dark, feeding off the energy you deny it, until it becomes a potent, restless force capable of overwhelming you. Philosophically, this has been recognized for centuries. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that ignoring our darker instincts leads to a life of weakness and hypocrisy. He described the danger of living in ascetic ideals, of worshipping virtue without acknowledging the vitality of the instincts that give life its power. Arthur Schopenhauer, too, understood the unconscious as a realm of primal will, an undercurrent that drives human suffering and desire, whether we acknowledge it or not. To deny these forces is to live a half-life, detached from the currents that shape your own existence. Even contemporary psychology confirms this. Suppression of emotion, particularly socially forbidden emotions like rage, jealousy, or lust, correlates with anxiety, depression, and destructive behavior. Cognitive neuroscience shows that unconscious impulses often guide decisions far more than our conscious reasoning. In other words, the more we pretend we are rational, controlled beings, the more the hidden, unexamined parts of ourselves pull the levers behind the scenes. Jung described this as a hidden, unexamined parts of ourselves pull the levers behind the scenes. Jung described this as a compensatory mechanism. The shadow expresses itself indirectly in ways we do not recognize as ours. Culturally, this problem is amplified. Modern society is obsessed with curated personas, moral branding, and external validation. Social media, consumer culture, and the moral narratives of our communities encourage the continual suppression of inconvenient desires and instincts. The paradox is cruel. The very mechanisms that teach us to be good and successful, discipline, politeness, aspiration, also train us to deny integral parts of ourselves. The result is a subtle but pervasive form of psychological exile. We inhabit a self that is a carefully edited projection, while our true energy, creativity, and vitality lie locked behind that metaphorical door. And it is not just negative traits that are banished. Ambition, assertiveness, and even genius are often repressed in the interest of conformity. Jung warned that what is denied often emerges as shadow projections. We see in others the very qualities we refuse to own. We envy, hate, or fear traits in people that exist in ourselves, but we cannot acknowledge them. This is why patterns repeat in relationships, in work, in personal development, because the unintegrated shadow exerts influence until it is met and embraced consciously. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experience in the horrors of the concentration camps, observed something profound. Humans have the capacity to find meaning even in extreme suffering, but only when they face the totality of their reality, including its darkness. To deny the shadow is to deny a portion of reality itself. The unexamined shadow is not moral failure. It is the cost of incompleteness, a silent force that erodes meaning, joy, and authenticity. Imagine the psychological mechanism. CS as a garden. If you ignore the weeds, they grow unchecked, strangling the flowers you cultivate. But if you study them, understand them, even pluck them by the roots, the garden becomes richer, more vibrant, more alive. The same is true for the psyche. The shadow is not poison. It is the fertile soil in which courage, creativity, and power take root. But it demands engagement, honesty, and the willingness to sit with discomfort. To look directly at impulses society teaches you to fear. This hidden problem is insidious because it masquerades as normalcy. You go about your day, thinking yourself rational, kind, and in control. Yet beneath the surface, the unacknowledged aspects of your being shape your fears, desires, decisions, and even your sense of self-worth. The energy you deny accumulates, influencing your life in ways that seem external. Repeated failures, toxic relationships, unexplained anxiety, and the nagging feeling that you are not fully yourself. Here is the cruel twist. The very desire to avoid darkness, to stay good, moral, or acceptable, is what gives the shadow its power. Avoidance strengthens it. Repression empowers it. And because our society teaches avoidance as virtue, millions live lives subtly guided by forces they do not understand, while imagining they are in control. Yet, there is hope hidden within this problem. The shadow's existence is not a curse, it is an invitation. The fact that these elements of your psyche are hidden, powerful, and restless signals that integrating them could unlock untapped reserves of vitality, creativity, and insight. Jung called it the treasure in the shadow, the paradoxical promise that the very darkness you fear contains your greatest power. And so we reach a precipice. Understanding the shadow is not enough. One must also confront its consequences, the ways it shapes your life, your choices, your relationships, your society, often without your awareness. Only by seeing its unseen influence can the path to integration begin. You might think that ignoring your shadow is harmless, a personal secret tucked safely behind a mental door. But the truth is more insidious. The unacknowledged parts of yourself do not remain locked away. They leak. They shape your life quietly, invisibly, and with a subtle, almost imperceptible force. The shadow doesn't scream. It whispers, nudges, manipulates, and ultimately shapes the reality you inhabit without your consent. Consider your relationships. Have you ever found yourself reacting to someone in a way that feels irrational, disproportionate, or even cruel? And then wondered, where did that come from? Often, it is your shadow projecting outward. The traits you deny in yourself appear in others, and your unconscious mind responds not to who they truly are, but to the reflection of your own unacknowledged desires, fears, and resentments. A colleague's ambition might feel threatening because you have denied your own. A friend's jealousy may sting because you refuse to confront your own. This is projection, the mind's secret trick to externalize what it cannot bear to see in itself. And projection is only the beginning. The shadow also governs your habits, your compulsions, and even the narratives you tell yourself about life. Have you ever sabotaged your own success at a moment when everything seemed aligned, or found yourself repeating destructive patterns in relationships despite knowing better? This is the shadow at work, compensating, reshaping, and influencing your life from beneath the surface. Neuroscience suggests that unconscious impulses guide much of human behavior. Your conscious rationality is often a passenger, not the driver. Every unacknowledged fear, every suppressed rage, every denied impulse is like a hidden engine steering your decisions in directions you would never consciously choose. Culturally, the consequences are no less profound. And societies that collectively repress their shadows manifest that denial in violence, prejudice, and mass hysteria. When communities refuse to confront collective fears of mortality, of difference, of power, those fears erupt in the form of war, scapegoating, and authoritarian control. Aldous Huxley warned of societies anesthetized by comfort, illusion, and repression, where unexamined drives fester and re-emerge destructively. The consequences of shadow denial are not abstract. They are real, tangible, and often devastating, shaping history as surely as they shape individual lives. Think of addiction, for instance, a cultural and personal epidemic. Jung believed that addictive behaviors are often attempts to fill the void created by the unintegrated shadow. When the mind refuses to face its darkness, it seeks distraction, stimulation, or escape, channeling unacknowledged energy into destructive patterns. Depression, anxiety, and chronic dissatisfaction are shadow-driven feedback loops, symptoms, not causes, of the unexamined self. The more you resist, the more power the shadow accrues, influencing choices you mistakenly believe are fully conscious. Even your creativity, paradoxically, suffers under shadow suppression. The mind's richest material often emerges from confronting the uncomfortable, the chaotic, and the forbidden. Artists, writers, and thinkers who refused to confront their own darkness found themselves stalled, blocked, or superficial. The shadow contains raw, unprocessed experience, pain, desire, rage, imagination, that when integrated becomes fuel for authentic expression. Deny it, and your creative life becomes pale, derivative, or incomplete. And yet, the most subtle consequence is perhaps the hardest to perceive, a creeping sense of incompleteness. You might succeed materially, socially, or intellectually, but there is a persistent feeling that something essential is missing, a sense that life is slipping through your fingers, that joy is shallow, that relationships are performative. This dissatisfaction is not a failure of circumstance. It is the shadow calling for acknowledgement. It whispers through anxiety, discontent, boredom, and restlessness, demanding recognition even when the conscious mind refuses to answer. Consider the moral implications. How many judgments you make, how many criticisms you levy, how many conflicts you endure are fueled by unacknowledged parts of yourself. How often do you condemn traits in others that exist within you, unconfronted and unintegrated? The shadow is the invisible hand that shapes your moral compass, often in contradiction with your conscious intentions. This is why self-righteousness, hypocrisy, and envy are so common. They are projections of the unrecognized self. Even your sense of identity is molded by this hidden force. The I you believe yourself to be, disciplined, rational, kind, successful, is only a partial construct. Beneath it lies a chaotic, uncharted landscape of instincts, fears, and potentialities. Until you acknowledge it, your sense of self is incomplete, fragile, and reactive. You are, in a sense, a house with a locked wing. Functional, perhaps beautiful, but haunted by rooms you refuse to enter. And here is the urgency. Ignoring the shadow is not neutral. Every day it grows in subtle power. Every unacknowledged impulse, every suppressed emotion, every fear avoided, becomes a latent force shaping your destiny. You might think you control your life, but in truth, you are increasingly guided by the very aspects of yourself you refuse to see. The shadow is patient. It waits. It does not judge, but it will not remain dormant forever. Jung argued that this latent power, if integrated, could become a source of liberation, but unintegrated, it becomes an invisible prison. Your life is both richer and more dangerous than you realize, and the door to the Hokosis. Shadow is still standing at the end of the hallway. It is no longer a question of curiosity. It is a question of survival, authenticity, and the realization of your full potential. The unseen consequences are not merely psychological or cultural, they are existential. Your freedom, creativity, moral clarity, and inner peace depend on how you engage with the parts of yourself you have denied. The shadow is not just a problem. It is the crucible in which the full spectrum of your being is tested. Ignore it, and it shapes you unconsciously, constraining and distorting your life. Face it, and it offers power, insight, and vitality that no conventional virtue can provide. And so, The door remains. The mist seeps from beneath it. The shadow waits. You stand at the threshold, knowing that everything you do, every choice you make, is already being influenced by that which you have refused to acknowledge. The question is no longer theoretical. Will you continue to live under its unseen influence? Or will you step forward and begin the work of integration? Now imagine standing before the locked door again, knowing that what lies beyond has been shaping your life in secret. Fear rises, as it should, because the unknown always does. But this time, instead of retreating, you breathe deeply and place your hand on the handle. This is the first act of rebellion, the refusal to let unconscious forces govern you without consent. The rebellion begins not with heroic gestures, but with courage, the courage to face what you have denied. Carl Jung did not write about the shadow as a distant, abstract idea. He described it as a living, breathing part of your psyche that demands recognition. Integration is not optional. It is the path to wholeness. To rebel against unconscious domination, you must first cultivate radical honesty. Admit to yourself the impulses you have hidden, the envy, the rage, the desires society deems inappropriate, the hunger for power or autonomy, even the impulses toward creativity or rebellion you have silenced. This is not indulgence. It is acknowledgement. Denial is surrender. Awareness is liberation. Historical figures illustrate the power of this approach. Consider Friedrich Nietzsche, who embraced the tumultuous, instinctive forces within himself rather than pretending they didn't exist. He described the necessity of confronting chaos and suffering directly, of dancing with the irrational to unlock profound creativity and insight. Or think of the great alchemists whose metaphors for transformation mirrored Jung's psychological processes, turning base material into gold, transmuting the dark and hidden into life-giving energy. The rebellion is alchemical. It transforms what is feared into what empowers. One of the most practical steps toward integration is shadow work, deliberate engagement with the aspects of yourself you have disowned. This begins with observation. Notice when you are triggered, when envy, irritation, or discomfort surfaces. Ask, what part of me is reflected in this reaction? Journaling, meditation, or therapy can illuminate patterns you were blind to. These practices are not about self-punishment. They are about mapping the hidden territory so that you can reclaim the energy it has been quietly siphoning. Another strategy is creative confrontation. Express your shadow through art, movement, writing, or even structured role play. Jung believed that creativity is the shadow's language, the bridge between unconscious energy and conscious life. When you allow your darkness to speak, it loses its power to manipulate you unconsciously. Rage becomes narrative, desire becomes vision, fear becomes insight. You are no longer a passive observer, you're an active participant in your own psyche. Radical rebellion also requires challenging cultural norms. Society teaches that light is virtuous and darkness is dangerous. The truly rebellious, however, understand that integration, not suppression, is the path to genuine morality and authenticity. Assert your right to be fully human, to feel deeply, to desire intensely, to fail spectacularly, and to create boldly. Boundaries, ethics, and conscious reflection remain essential, but they are tools for integration, not chains for repression. Consider the paradox. By embracing what you once feared, you gain control. The impulses you once thought would destroy you instead fuel your choices. Shadow energy, once acknowledged, becomes courage in adversity, empathy in relationships, and vision in creativity. The rebellion is not reckless indulgence, it is strategic engagement. You channel the power that once sabotaged you into deliberate action. Jung called this process individuation, the emergence of a self that is whole, conscious, and free. This rebellion is also existential. Viktor Frankl suggested that life's meaning emerges when we confront suffering and responsibility directly. Integration of the shadow is not merely psychological, it is the reclamation of agency over your life. The fears, failures, and desires you have hidden from yourself are not obstacles, they are clues, pointing toward the life you are capable of living if you meet yourself fully. Yet the path is not easy. You will encounter resistance from within: guilt, shame, denial. Old coping mechanisms, avoidance, distraction, perfectionism will fight to keep the door locked. Resistance is a signal that the process is working. The shadow only yields when approached with both courage and compassion. Meet it with neither judgment nor indulgence, and it begins to transform. Even relationships change. People often fear that embracing the shadow will make them unlovable or dangerous. The opposite is true. Integration deepens empathy, improves communication, and dissolves projection. Once you stop seeing others as mirrors for disown, parts of yourself. Relationships are no longer battlegrounds but spaces for genuine connection. You are free to respond to reality rather than react to unconscious echoes. The rebellion also has societal implications. Individuals who integrate their shadows are less likely to perpetuate unconscious cruelty, bias, or violence. They operate from awareness rather than reaction. Communities shaped by integrated individuals are more compassionate, creative, and resilient. Your rebellion, then, is not merely personal. It ripples outward, transforming the world one consciousness at a time. Finally, the act of rebellion transforms fear itself. Where once the shadow inspired anxiety, it now becomes a source of insight. Where once repression drained vitality, conscious engagement replenishes it. The locked door no longer intimidates. It beckons. The darkness is no longer enemy. It is collaborator. You are no longer divided, fractured, or reactive. You are empowered, whole, and alive. This is the radical promise of shadow integration, that the very parts of yourself you feared, your rage, your desire, your darkness, when acknowledged and embraced, become the engine of freedom, creativity, and authentic power. The rebellion is complete when you stop fleeing and start engaging, when the unknown is no longer threat but teacher, when the shadow is no longer a prison but a reservoir. And in this engagement, you glimpse the final revelation, that power, wholeness, and freedom were never outside you. They were waiting behind the door you feared to open. Imagine standing in the darkness beyond the door, the mist curling around your ankles like smoke, the air heavy with possibility. You feel your pulse quicken, not with fear, but with recognition. The darkness is no longer alien. It is yours. Every fear, every desire, every impulse you once denied is present. But now it is not a threat. Now it is a source of insight, energy, and wholeness. And in this moment, the ultimate truth crystallizes. You have been complete all along. And you only needed to meet yourself fully to realize it. Most people spend their lives running from themselves, mistaking light for safety and repression for morality. They imagine the self as a tidy construction, a socially acceptable facade that can be maintained indefinitely. But the psyche does not abide by such illusions. Its depth is infinite, its architecture labyrinthine. To deny it is to live partially, to play life at arm's length. To integrate it is to step fully into the flow of existence, messy, unpredictable, powerful. Jung called this process individuation, and it is not gradual or superficial, it is transformative. Here is the paradox that Jung insisted upon, and that you now grasp with clarity. The very qualities you feared, the darkness, the rage, the desire, the forbidden impulses, are the vessels of your greatest power. Your creativity, courage, compassion, and capacity for authentic love all emerge from engagement with this shadow. When suppressed, these qualities remain dormant, distorted, or expressed destructively. When embraced, they illuminate the path to self-realization. You realize that wholeness is not the absence of darkness, but the conscious inclusion of it. Consider this in practical terms. The anger you once thought dangerous becomes the energy to set boundaries, to act decisively, to demand what you deserve. The desire you once feared becomes the fire that fuels creativity, ambition, and passion. The shame you once buried becomes the lens through which you cultivate empathy, understanding, and humility. The very shadows you avoided are the architects of a more vibrant, authentic, and powerful self. In other words, your darkness was never a curse. It was the blueprint of your liberation. And the most profound realization of all, the shadow is not an obstacle to be overcome. It is a companion, a teacher, a co-creator of your life. The more you integrate it, the more you understand the interdependence of light and dark, order and chaos, strength and vulnerability. You begin to see that life itself is a dance between these forces, and to deny either is to live out of rhythm. The ultimate rebellion is not to destroy the darkness, but to join it in dialogue, to allow it to speak, to channel its energy consciously. There is an almost poetic symmetry here. Imagine all the moments you felt weak, lost, or controlled by impulses you could not understand. They were never signs of failure, they were signals. Each discomfort, each irrational reaction, each shadow-projected conflict was a marker pointing you toward the door you now open. The shadows were not enemies, but guides leading you toward wholeness. In retrospect, you see that every struggle, every inner conflict, every act of self-sabotage was preparation for this confrontation. The darkness was the crucible of your emergence. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You now understand this statement viscerally. Light alone cannot illuminate. Only by stepping into darkness, by naming it, by integrating it, does consciousness expand. The power you once sought externally, recognition, success, control, was always latent within, waiting for the courage to acknowledge its source. And there is a ripple effect. Once you have embraced your shadow, the world itself begins to shift. You no longer respond to projection with projection, fear with fear, or repression with repression. Relationships become mirrors of authenticity rather than battlegrounds of denial. Decisions are guided not by unconscious impulses, but by conscious choice. Creativity flows without obstruction. Emotional depth becomes a resource rather than a liability. You have crossed the threshold from being driven by hidden forces to being the conscious architect of your own existence. Yet the final truth extends beyond the individual. Integrated individuals carry a subtle influence. They challenge systems of repression, they model courage, they embody authenticity. They catalyze change not through aggression or moral superiority, but by demonstrating that wholeness is possible, that darkness is not enemy, but partner. By integrating your shadow, you do not merely transform yourself, you contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself. And so, you stand fully present, neither afraid nor ashamed. The mist that once seemed threatening now feels like home, familiar, vital, and alive. You realize that fear was a gatekeeper, not an enemy. The shadow, once a source of anxiety, is now a reservoir of power. The life you feared would overwhelm you is the life you were always meant to live. You understand, finally, that true power arises not from denying your darkness, but from integrating it. Take a moment. Breathe. Feel the fullness of your being, the light, the dark, the chaos, the order, the rage, the tenderness, the desire, the wisdom, all coexisting within. This is wholeness. This is freedom. This is power. And it has been yours all along, waiting only for the courage to unlock the door. The ultimate revelation is simple and devastatingly profound. You cannot escape yourself, nor should you try. Every avoidance is wasted energy. Every denial strengthens the very forces you fear. But if you meet yourself fully, courageously, compassionately, you unlock an energy more potent than fear, more enduring than doubt, more transformative than any external achievement. You are no longer fragmented, reactive, or constrained. You are whole. And now you step forward, hand steady, heart open, into a life that is yours in its entirety, shadow, light, and all.